Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to those that are attending. We have people coming in from Europe and also on the West Coast. Thank you all for joining. This is a joint presentation by Flatiron Law Group and Falcon Capital. We're talking today about getting your company ready for sale. How you look is more important than ever. I am Lenny Nuara from Flatiron Law Group. We are a mergers and acquisitions and technology boutique with offices in New York, New Jersey, North Carolina, and California. We handle mergers and acquisitions significantly in the tech sector or the cutting edge sectors of various industries. Partners all come from what used to be known as big law, the bigger law firms, but now we're providing a flat fee or fixed fee mergers and acquisition representation based upon our heavy use of technology and also our vast experience in handling M&A for decades across all of us. I'm delighted to inform you that today we will have two incredibly helpful speakers to bring this through. One is my co-presenter is Ted Stack from Falcon. He'll be moderating and along with his client. We are delighted to have Jeff Gasser, the CEO of Deerwalk, who will talk through essentially his experiences. Normally on these seminars that we've been doing, we have a lot of structure in them. We have a series of presentation slides that we go through. Because of the kindness of Jeff to give us his time, we're going to do this more along the lines of a fireside chat with Ted and myself, asking Jeff some questions about his experience in the recent transaction for the sale of Deerwalk. However, you should know at the end of this, when we conclude, we do have a structured presentation that we will send to everybody that's attended or registered for the seminar. To the extent that any of you have questions about some of the topics that were talked about today, or regarding the content in the materials, we'd be happy to show you. To contact us, then we'll be happy to provide more detail on those materials. So with that, I'm going to introduce you to Ted Stack. Ted will take over, introduce himself, and also then introduce Jeff, and then we'll have our conversations with Jeff. Ted, I'm going to drop off the slides, and now you can.
Great, thanks, Lenny. Appreciate the introduction, and thank you all for joining today. As Lenny said, we're going to try to make this a little more interesting instead of a slide flip. We're fortunate to have Jeff Gasser with us as the co-founder and CEO of Deerwalk. I'm going to turn it over to Jeff here in a second to give a little bit about his background. The whole purpose here, as Lenny had said, is to take you through really the Deerwalk journey, from the lens and eyes of the CEO. We think that very rarely do we get the opportunity to kind of allow that look into a transaction. We'll try to make this a bit fun and a bit conversational. As Lenny said, our firm and myself actually had the pleasure of working with Jeff and his team at Deerwalk over many years, and leading to a recent kind of sale and transaction of the business that we'll get into. So without further ado, maybe I'll turn this over to Jeff. And Jeff, be great for you to give a little bit about your personal background, because I think context is always interesting, and leading up to maybe the founding of Deerwalk, and we'll kick it off from there.
Okay, thanks. Thanks everybody for joining. I'm in Tampa in an office building here that I started my career in 1978. I started my career as a CPA, went to work for literally 3 floors up. That's why I'm in this building. It's just kind of it's got a little bit of a sentiment of value to me. And there were 2 people in that time that got me really thinking about becoming an entrepreneur. One, I got thrown onto this audit of a dialysis company that was owned by the doctor that invented Gatorade. And so I used to do his taxes. I used to audit his dialysis clinics. And I would see this money coming in from the Del Monte Trust and thinking, boy, I gotta I got to think about doing something like that. And then the thing that really clinched it for me was there was a Cuban CPA that I admired greatly. He had come over when Castro came into power, and he had to flee, and he reinvented himself. And Tony was just very matter of fact about things. And we had a client who was very successful. And I remember Tony looked at me one day about this guy's business, and he says, you know, that guy, he was too stupid to know that business shouldn't have worked. and that was the moment that I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I wanted to be the stupid guy, not the CPA. And so as time went on, I had an opportunity to start a company a few years later, and I quit my job to do that. And over the years, I started a executive. I was a co-founder, young guy in it, but a co-founder of an executive relocation company that ultimately ended up selling out to serve a relocation. Moved out to Southern California, ended up starting a pediatric home care business that sold out to a subsidiary of Seicom, which is a large security company in Japan. Moved back to Florida, started a doctor group that ended up becoming part of a company called Mariner Health, which was a subacute company. Started a company in Boston from Orlando with a couple guys called D2 Hawkeye, which is sold out in 2009. It's part of Cotiviti today, a company called Cotiviti. And then one of the co-founders of that was a fellow named Rudra Pandey. And over the years, we would sort of talk about the next, kind of business. And I didn't know if we were really serious about it, or, we're just at the water cooler looking for something to talk about. But about a year after that sold, I had already left, and Rudra called me up. It was a Friday before Memorial Day weekend. And he said was recapitalizing this little company called Deerwalk his wife had started. And he wanted me to join it. And we talked all weekend about what that role would be. And by Tuesday after Memorial Day weekend, we basically just got started. And what I did was I picked up the phone and called everybody that I knew just to tell them what I was doing now. And one of the very first, I don't know if it was the first person, but it was on the first day for sure. It was one of the very first people was Keith Devontier, which is one of Ted's partners. And I talked to Keith, and Keith said, geez, we might even be able to help you. We might even be able to have some of our clients who need some programming. And so our relationship with Falcon, maybe not formally in a legal sense, but informally, started on the first day we were in business. Deerwalk is a software as a service company. So probably the way to think about it, and in my world, it's always been fairly complicated to explain to people. My mother never understood what I did because everything was so complicated. And she'd go to like lunch with her friends, and one of her friends would say, well, my son's a lawyer, and another friend would say, well, my daughter's a doctor. And they'd look at my mom and say, Wink, what's your son doing? She'd say, well, I don't know. I have no idea. I think he robs banks. So it's a complicated business we were in. You can think of it as a search engine that would sit on top of healthcare data and provide users the ability to analyze that data. We started it in 2010. Rudra, the chairman of the company, is Nepalese, and so in our prior business at D2 Hawkeye, which started right, I was telling Ted, it was 42 days before 9/11. And the internet bubble had just burst back then, and there was very little money chasing businesses like ours. And he felt like Nepal, his home country, could become like India or the Ukraine and be the next sort of programming offshore site. So we did a lot of programming for our business in Nepal back then. To this day, Cotiviti maintains and has grown an operation in Kathmandu. So when we started this company, we went back to that. We felt like the two things we knew, how to do were, integrate healthcare data and run an offshore operation in Nepal. So we started that up at that time, and to this day, it operates. It was a big part of our success. And as we were looking to do a transaction, what was clear to me was that there would be a lot of people that would shy away from that and be afraid of it because it's a third world country, and what's the infrastructure, and we don't know anything about it, and et cetera. And somehow we had to find a partner who saw that as a positive, as we did. And so, and I was very grateful that we did, so that the folks that bought our company are in the process of expanding that operation and moving programming, as I understand it, from India into Nepal. So it was really a kind of a great thing in terms of our valuation. It's a great thing just because of our mission as a company was to try to support. It was something that made us feel good that we were building a company in the United States and we were helping improve the situation in one of the poorest countries on the planet, certainly the poorest country in Asia. And all of our employees bought into that. All of our employees embraced that. It was really part of who we were. So when we found a partner who saw the value in that, it was great for us financially, but it was also just great for us as human beings. We walked through that. We had a very interesting process. We almost 2 years ago, or I guess it was in the fall of 2018, we looked at a transaction back then, went through a bunch of private equity firms, got to Christmas Eve and decided not to do it, decided to bet on ourselves. I think Ted thought I was a nut when we did that, but I probably was.
Only because it was Christmas Eve. Any other day would have been fine, Jeff.
I remember looking at my wife, and we've been going through all this, and I said, "Honey, we decided we're going to pass on taking the money." And she looked at me and said, "Oh, thank God."
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Jeff, just as you were talking about this, because, I think as you go through a journey like you went on from scratch to, that was 8 years into the journey, the company, fortunately, not like a lot of software companies, spent a ton of time early on investing in the company, developing the platform, developing the technology. And then, you get to a point, I think, as the CEO, and I'd love to get your kind of thoughts on this, that you have that, kind of eureka moment, right? Where you're like, hey, we're onto something here. And I think that switch goes off. And I'd like to for you, if you did have that moment, what were, or series of moments, maybe what were they for you? And then, I think a lot of that drives ultimately, as investors, as managers of a company, ultimately, what you think about in terms of, a monetization or realization of what you're building. So love to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, in our case, because we had our prior company was in this same space, so we ultimately ended up competing with what we had built the last time. And so we knew the space pretty well. And we knew that the weakness to all the companies in our space was the data integrity, data quality, a very challenging area to get that right. It's not like banking or something else where it's where the data is really standardized. It's a mess. I mean, it starts in a doctor's office and ends up with us. So it's a total mess. And we focused on getting the data right as a company and less on the visualizations and the kind of the sexy stuff that our competitors focused on. With the belief that in the long run, you can have all that stuff, And if the data, if all the numbers are wrong, it really doesn't matter. And that we would eventually get there with the visualizations and some of the things that people liked about our competitors. And when we did, they just really would not be able to compete. And ultimately, we did get there a couple years ago. I mean, it wasn't like we weren't having success before that, but it got to a point where I was on a WebEx one day, just and it was a combination of the product we built and this and Ted had told me when we back when we didn't do the deal in 2018 that I'd have to bring in smarter people, more people. It'll get more complicated, and we got to manage through all that. And we did. And I'm watching these folks do this demo with some really big name customers. And I was just amazed at what they had. And they built it. It wasn't me. I didn't do any of the work. I mean, they built it. And I sat there and watched that demo and I thought, I don't know how anybody beats us. I don't know how we ever lose. I mean, unless the fix is in, before we started, because I know what's in our space and I know there's nobody that can do all the things that this thing could do. Probably the prior thing, Ted, was that because we use search engine technology and not database technology, our capabilities at delivering results at large volumes of data was just in excess of what anybody else could do, no matter who the competitor. And in the beginning, nobody really understood that. And then there was some point where people started getting it, even though our visualizations weren't there. And that was another kind of eureka moment, like, okay, this was a good idea, that we did this. It took 27 months to get our first version up and running, but that it was worth it. We as you know, Ted, but others would not, several of us worked for free for the first, I don't remember, 2, 3,
Yeah.
4 years. My wife could tell you exactly how long it was. I don't remember, but I worked for free for quite some time. And that mitigated our need for capital. And basically we just took a little bit of friends' money that asked to invest. We really never really truly asked for money from anybody, but we did have some friends and family invest. And that was the only money we ever took the whole time.
Yeah, it's a pretty atypical story where, the business, a technology business in particular, did not actually have to access, the capital markets, quotes around capital markets. So this is truly a founder-led, a founder-funded, and as Jeff said, a few friends and family around the table, along with them, to build the business. I've joked, and I think, maybe some folks on the phone that are in the technology, verticals can relate to this, that it's very difficult to sell a black box. And we kept referring to that in the Deerwalk sense that what they were really good at was in the underpinnings of the technology that was developed. And the technology, as Jeff had said, was so far superior, but it's really tough to get folks to focus on, what's going on behind the scenes. Most private equity firms and quite a few strategics, I always use the term shiny toys, right? They like to look at shiny toys and nice user interfaces. Mm-hmm. And, I think you'll find throughout this conversation, Jeff is a very humble individual and oftentimes understates, some of the accomplishments of the firm. But, I think ultimately they drove to a wonderful outcome. Jeff, you had mentioned that you had, kind of in that, 2-3 years ago, needed to bring in some additional talent. It may be worthwhile to kind of talk about that step, that critical step, both, maybe inside folks, executives, and outside folks that, were involved with, kind of that acceleration of the business, and for you guys, really where that stood.
Well, where we had always underinvested was in sales. We put all our money in the product, and for the longest time, the first 3 or 4 years of the company, depending on how you looked at our financial statements, unless you put my salary, which was not much, into sales and marketing, we had 0% of revenues were dedicated to sales and marketing. So we started bringing on a couple sales executives in 2016 and 17, but we had totally underinvested in it. And we got to that point where we thought we've got something really good here now, and we can compete with anybody in any vertical, or any market segment. And so we went out and got some really top-notch people, not only in the sales side, solutions architect, which, essentially was somebody that would sort of a professional demo doer, and also somebody that can capture, requirements of clients. We went out and got more clinical folks on staff. We just had to be a different, I guess what I would say is when we decided to not do a transaction, what we wanted to do was prove to ourselves we could get into two markets. One was the large employer space, and the second one was the large health plan space, because we had no track record there, and we felt like to get the valuation we wanted, we needed to get into those spaces. We had to prove that we could compete, and so we had to bring on the kind of people that we needed to give those kinds of companies comfort that we could compete. And what we did was, I won't disclose the name of one of the large employers we signed, but Rob Gronkowski was in a parade there the other day, and a couple of the largest health plans in the country, a couple of the largest benefit consultants in the country. Because I think what you have to have is, if you really want to get a transaction done at a place where everybody's going to be just ecstatic, you have to have some huge wins, and then you have to have this pipeline of all the wins yet to come. And that was really our goal when we decided to invest in ourselves. And it took a couple of years, but that's what, I think about my last, I think on my last 2 days as the CEO of Deerwalk, on the second last day, we signed a contract with the largest benefit consultant in the country to replace IBM Watson nationally. And the next day I resigned because we sold the company. And so it was
it's I know everyone hears that you always want to be in market on an uptick, right? Not on a downtick. And it's really hard to time that. I think for folks' benefit, as you dialed ahead during that 2-year, kind of growth and time frame, the company continuously got, inbound inquiries to do something, and it not unusual when you are disrupting a market and you're actually winning a lot of business. And so I would say, Jeff, a week wouldn't go by where there wasn't a private equity firm that basically said, hey, I'm interested in doing something with you. There were a lot of very large organizations that, core strategic organizations that saw, the technology working and were interested. Explain a lot. Kind of uniquely, explain from your perspective as a CEO how you decided to handle those things and kind of deal with that, and did it guide you and the board's ultimate decision of actually taking the company to market?
Yeah, it was interesting because I still get them, Ted. I still get them. It's like, don't you guys look at press releases? But I still get them. But we used to get, I would say, almost one a day in the last year or two, is maybe one a day, but we'd get them constantly. And really the value that Falcon brought to us is we really never thought about that. What I tried to think about was building the best company I could build. I figured that the rest would take care of itself. So when those calls came in, I would just ship them over to you, or if they went to one of the other folks, everybody knew, just send them to Falcon. You would help us deal with that. And that allowed us to just focus on running a company. which was in the, and I would say this, in that last 3 or 4 months of our company, when we got pulled away, had been able to build a good enough team that had really matured that they ran the company in the last 3 or 4 months, because we had very little time to. I mean, we could get involved in some things, but that allowed that second level to really crop up, and they did a wonderful job taking care of things that allowed us to focus on getting the transaction done. But I don't know what we would have done without you guys, because you could literally just get sucked up by taking phone calls from people that want to talk to you about your business, and there's just no time.
I joke with Jeff that he was used to that because he was so popular in high school that, people were trying to, get dates with him all the time, but, he didn't like that analogy.
I think it was making up for my lack of popularity in high school.
Yeah. No, it's interesting because, I think, again, as the company kind of got closer and closer to, the aha moment, we had a couple of things going on, right? We'll get to the pandemic in a second, because I think it's really interesting to talk a little bit about the thought process there. I will tell you, one of the biggest issues with any company is really, Jeff's talked a lot about going to market, customers, growing the business, getting your internal house in order. And I'm going to specifically talk about financial information and data. I think one of the key, the key decisions was also to invest in that. A year, it turned out to be about a year before we ultimately ended up, or actually, within that time frame, ultimately ended up, going to market. And not like a lot of companies, they paid the bills, they could tell, where their customer contracts were, they know how they're making revenue. It's the rest of the story. Jeff, maybe talk a little bit about that decision and that investment, and then I think let's quickly pivot into, getting into, the transaction itself.
Yes, thank you. I forgot. Yeah, we brought on a young man as a controller. I guess it was maybe 15 months or so, 16 months before the transaction was done. That was a significant investment for us. And really, I mean, our books were, frankly, a mess. You couldn't sort of get to an accurate gross margin number per product that we're offering. There was just, our general ledger system really wasn't what it should have been, which is sort of interesting because we had 2 or 3 CPAs, former CPAs in the company, but that's just, we weren't at the point in our lives where that's anything we wanted to get in the weeds with. And so this young man came in and just did a incredible job. Sort of redid our whole general ledger and worked with our operations people to figure out what they were tracking, to make sure that he had everything set up that was going to track the numbers precisely the way that they would want to look at them. Spent a lot of time. The guy worked hours and hours and hours. And by the time he got through all of that, we started thinking about the transaction. So he started spending time preparing for an audit and then dealing with all the things that happened with the transaction. I just don't know what we would have done without Tom. This guy just did an amazing job. And what's gratifying is the new owners of the company really recognize that. And I think he's got a great, career opportunity, while our employees do, staying on with Cedargate, which is the company that bought us. But it's he in particular, I think I can't emphasize enough how much your books have to be to the point where they can withstand a ton of scrutiny. I would also say, looking back on it, make sure everything on your books are GAAP. Make sure there's nothing you're doing that's not GAAP. And the reason why is one item that we had that we weren't keeping up with GAAP is we didn't accrue vacation time. And so our feeling on it was, look, it's kind of a big waste of time. You know, at the end of the year, you use it or you lose it. So what's the point? Well, when we ended up going to sell the company, we transacted on the 14th of December. There was a bunch of built up vacation time for the year that we had not put on the books. That was all going to go away in 2 weeks. But we ended up having to take a hit against our purchase price for the amount of that accrued vacation time to get the books to GAAP. And the truth of it is if we would have accrued it all along and had a smaller profit, it still would have been the same purchase price.
Yeah.
We wouldn't have lost a dime. So you don't save yourself anything from not having everything at GAAP. I mean, that to me was a real lesson.
Yeah. So, you know, it's a great segue, and you know, and just for everyone's benefit, you know, the board of the company met and, you know, made a decision to go proactively, you know, in a very focused way to talk to folks about a transaction in February, early February of last year, pre-pandemic, really. Obviously the pandemic hit, you know, we proactively kind of managed that process, you know, during March and April. You know, really, you know, everyone on the planet was trying to figure out, you know, how, you know, the pandemic was going to impact their own businesses. So we actually made a decision early on in that process that we would wait until the summertime where we would, you know, reevaluate, you know, the situation at that point. And interestingly enough, you know, we'll talk a little about the process, you know, during COVID, but, you know, Deerwalk's business was not significantly impacted by COVID as a matter of fact, I wouldn't say it was a beneficiary. I think every business's sales process slowed down just to try to figure out how to deal with no travel and meetings and face-to-face. But the technology and underlying issue that Deerwalk solved became even more important, you know, for employers and other folks in the marketplace. So we made a decision collectively, you know, together with the board to take the company to market. And I will tell you that, you know, not done without a lot of thought, especially because, as Jeff had mentioned, we had, you know, several hundred employees in a remote third world country that we knew would be very difficult to diligence. And so, you know, as you're thinking about these things, and, you know, what I will tell you, and Jeff, you can, you know, we ended up, just from a process standpoint, the company, you know, as we talked about, was, you know, there were a lot of very interested folks. We only spoke to a narrow, you know, group of private equity firms and strategics, which really, as we sat with the board, and Jeff, you know, I'm going to ask you a little bit here about, you know, one of the most important things to do is prioritize what you want out of a transaction. You know, value is always top one or two in that, but there are other things that, you know, as you're thinking through that, and I'll give kudos to the team, but, you know, in terms of challenges of, you know, kind of managing this process, Jeff, maybe talk a little bit about your senior ownership, your senior management team, and trying to get to a point where you could really identify what you were looking for in a partner beyond an exceptional value, you know, for the company.
Well, and it becomes difficult because in our case we had 5 people on our senior management team. Obviously, Rudra and I had been there from the beginning, and there was really no result that could happen that wouldn't be great for us. But then we had some other like other folks that had joined maybe 5-6 years in, and, you know, and so people have these different kind of priorities for what's important to them, and so you have to try to, as best you can. You can't get the ideal situation for everybody, but in our case, what we were looking for was really that we would get enough of the value out of the company in cash And we were willing to invest some in the right situation, but it had to be enough. So we had different kind of amounts out there, different valuations, different amount of money put back in. And ultimately, I think we got to a really good result with our acquiring company, where we are investors in them, and as I am and several of our senior people are. And as it turned out, they so much value our management team that they have very significant roles in the new company and in the success of the new company. And so from my standpoint, and I know from Rudra's, as kind of the two principal founders, we feel very good about our money being in our, in the new company, because we know it's our team that are playing significant roles, and it gives us a lot of confidence. So it ended up, we found a scenario where they really valued our folks. They really valued our technology. They really valued our Nepal operation. And there was kind of the right mix of cash and reinvestment, and a terrific valuation from our standpoint. And I think if you ask them, they would think they got a great deal too. And so at this point, we're 2 months or so past it. I think everybody, feels good about it, which makes me happy.
That's great. One of the things that I think was a unique feature of Deer Walk was that virtually every employee was a shareholder.
Yeah.
And I will tell you, from an investment banker's perspective and from a legal perspective, just heard me say that we there's nothing more that gives us heartburn than having 500 plus people be shareholders of an organization that we're trying to transact, and put a large number of those in a foreign country, by the way, attached to that, holding stock in a U.S. organization. So a lot of fun. I always like to ask people, what was the biggest surprise in the transaction? We had a lot of interesting twists and turns, kind of in any transaction. Jeff, what was the biggest surprise for you? And maybe I'll share, some back as well.
Well, there were just some legal issues in Nepal that, just became really challenging, and very frustrating, frankly, trying to get to the point where everybody was comfortable with what the legal advice that we were getting, and we finally got there. But that, to me, that was, I never even thought about that. What I would tell people on the phone in terms of, or on the call, in terms of the stock option thing, this was the best Christmas I've ever had, because every one of our employees in the United States got a check, and almost everybody in Nepal got a check, unless somebody had just gotten there. And people would call me telling me, my husband's got a new car for the first time ever, and he's 70 years old, or I'm getting a new kitchen I wanted for 26 years, or I'm debt free for the first time in my life. I'm getting all these calls right before Christmas. It was the coolest thing to have been able to share that experience with all the people that helped make it happen. It was really awesome. And it was really fun.
And finding a partner, by the way, that, these folks worked hard and got a fantastic, kind of benefit from that. It culturally, I think, the way that you and the team managed the business, right? I mean, culturally really built a ginormous family of folks that, were, singularly moving forward in a vision. When you transact that company, it's oftentimes, a point of nervousness of a buyer. Of how do you continue that culture? How do you continue that? So maybe talk a little bit about, Jeff had mentioned that, the senior team of Deer Walk is playing a predominant role, which was one of actually the foundational kind of things that the board wanted to make happen here. Jeff, maybe talk a little bit about that, cultural integration and really, your role now in the organization, versus, what it was. I joke with every CEO that the day after you sell a company, you will feel completely differently, and just call me. And it's not just the money, it's a whole lot of other, things that you'll feel from that. So maybe
Yes.
comment a little bit about those.
Yeah. So the way I looked at it was we built a family business, a big family business of a bunch of people who were not related. We even called ourselves the Deerwalk family, and it's just what it was. I mean, I shared information with our employees. I would tell them exactly how we're doing, the good, the bad. We shared everything with all of our employees. It's just what it was. It was and what we would do is we would have 3 people from Nepal visit the United States every month. I mean, at first it was 1, and as we could afford more, but by the time we sold, there were 3 people from Nepal in the United States at any one time. All of our people, we would take to Nepal so that they could see what that was about. And we really, I feel like the one thing we probably did really well was being able to merge 2 different cultures. And we did that really, really well. And it really was kind of a family, and an experience that I think if you talk to any of our employees, it was maybe they'll say that was one of the most unique things they've ever been a part of. It's different now. It's not bad or good. It's just different. They're now part of a bigger organization. And so my role here is to help with the transition. So I'm here for a year and doing whatever I can to help with the transition. Some of that is just talking to people when they kind of freak out because it's a little different than it was. And it's just more of a typical corporate structure. It's just not going to be the way it was, and just helping them adjust to, as need be to life with their new company, and kind of being the cheerleader that I always was. I mean, that kind of was my role. I was, I was kind of the cheerleader. That's what I did for 10 years because I had the best team. We had the best. I always used to say, I would take any one of my folks at their position versus any one of our competitors at their position every time. And so really all I had to do was make sure everybody played nice in the sandbox and be the cheerleader that patted them on the back. And so I try to keep doing that a little bit now. But it's really kind of, the first month was a little tough. This month's getting a lot better. And I think, I really feel great about the roles that the folks are getting to play and how they're beginning to, it's a lot more work at first because you're dealing with these other subsidiaries you didn't know anything about. And so everything's a little overwhelming at first, but they're getting there. And so I basically still be the cheerleader, I guess.
Yeah, that's great.
I might have a lead for you too to help on those type of integration issues, but I don't know how you communicated to the employees and how that went. I mean, when you told them what was going on, and how did they respond? Oh,
you mean back in the transaction was happening, Mark? Yeah. Yeah. So what we did, if you go back 3 years or whatever it was with the first transaction, we never did. The second that I knew we were going to start down that road, I did a total company-wide call because I knew something would get out. They'd see that there was meetings. What's up with these meetings? And I told them all that we were contemplating doing a transaction. It's my job to do that. They don't have to worry about that. But what they could do is make sure that we take care of our customers, get new customers, make sure everybody's, happy, do whatever we can the way we always did to take care of our customers and treat them like family. When we decided not to do the transaction, I got them all together and said we didn't do the transaction. So what do? We take care of these customers like they're our family. Yeah. And then when we went to do the transaction again, same speech. And then ultimately, I mean, they were all kind of excited that because they knew what their stock options, they had no idea what we had transacted at, but they knew there was value there.
Oh, that's cool. That's good.
A big worldwide Zoom to tell everybody the day that.
By the way, Mark, Jeff didn't take my advice on that, because normally we would say let's keep the in the know folks to a minimum. It's not the Deer Walk way. They're a technology company. It really is a unique situation where, and this goes to the COVID issue, that, I mean, they were using Zoom, 10 years. The chief technology officer of the company, his boss was one of the founders of Zoom. So it's kind of like, okay, that they were using technology to communicate, before that. So it's an efficient process. So everyone knew everything that was going on in the business. So they made the decision, instead of trying to manipulate that we're just going to bring everyone under the tent. And unbelievably, from a confidentiality standpoint, there's not a person that went outside the bubble. Normally would say, keep the senior team in the bubble, and we'll, kind of, as the process goes on, communicate. And it was very unique in that way.
Well, I mean, so Ted and I usually have people hold off before, wait until we're like a few turns into the purchase agreement and stuff like that. But it's funny, Jeff, there's this one guy who was so paranoid, Dennis Labriola, had this software company up in New York. And he made me prep with him probably 6 or 7 times, like, work on the script, role play, etc. And on the day of, he was so nervous to give this speech, and he gave it, and he did a great job. And he said, any questions? And one of the guys said, so wait a minute, boss, bigger company, better benefits, career upside, promotion. Is that what you're telling me? He goes, yeah. He goes, great job, boss. See you later.
What's there not to like?
Yeah, exactly.
Which is sort of the same scenario for our folks. I mean, there's just opportunities they're being given that I could never give them, not anytime soon. So.
Yeah.
Lenny, do you want to open it up to questions from folks? I don't know if we have any. I want to be cognizant of our time here. We could go on talking for hours.
So Conrad, you're looking pretty good there, buddy.
Yeah, that's not him.
That's my point.
While we're waiting for some questions, on the COVID issue, I will tell you that taking a company through a process like this, we were very fortunate that Deer Walk's a technology company. They've got a lot of great technologists involved, and so we did all diligence virtually. We made a decision as a group that we would all be together every time we presented to an organization. And that was really just for continuity of, the team. And so we had COVID protocols, COVID testing. We had our own little pod within a pod, centered in outside of Boston, Lexington, Mass, where the company is actually physically located. And we did everything virtually. We made a decision to do a video production of the Nepalese operation. And so we actually showed a movie, is what I would tell you, a short movie of, the whole physical layout of the plant, the whole, cultural aspect of Nepal, employees, interviews, and had the senior leadership of that operation on a Zoom actually present that to folks. And I will tell you, everyone we were dealing with at the beginning of it said, we're not doing a deal until we're able to, see you, shake your hand, meet you in person. That quickly went away as we were able to kind of use the technology to be able to accomplish what we needed to accomplish. And I think really there was only a handful of actual physical meetings. The benefit of this was the buyer, this executive team was just in Connecticut. It was only a drive away. There were no planes involved with that. So we had some beneficial kind of geographic things in our favor there. But it was truly amazing what we were able to do.
So let me ask you this. Actually, it's to Jeff, but also to Ted and Mark. I mean, Jeff, you make it look easy with regard to, and you've been a serial entrepreneur. You've done it many times, and you have an easy way about you talking about things. But can you give us a sense, and then I'll let Mark and Ted expand on it, of the amount of preparation to get a company ready? You talked specifically about the financial side, but to get you ready to put yourself on up to sell, what's entailed. A lot of people understand, oh, it's difficult. A lot of people look at acquisitions like yours and say, oh, you were so lucky. You hear that all the time. Oh, lucky, he sold out, he made a fortune. And I'd like you to talk a little bit about, what the ugly side, how hard it is, what you have to do to really be prepared, and why you pulled out of one deal and why this one went through.
Yeah, well, the one thing that we did, I think, that was smart was we had the Falcon team come out at least once a year throughout the history of the company, and maybe twice a year, in the last couple of years, and kind of just sort of tell us where they thought the market was, where we fit into it. One of the values of a Falcon is just keeping you from believing your own, BS, and telling you the truth. I mean, that's the greatest value of, I think, in my personal opinion, of someone like Falcon. But I mean, it's no easy trick to build a pipeline of blue chip companies. So beyond the kind of all the finances and getting all that stuff together, there's a lot of things like just making sure you've got. One thing you have to realize is people are going to look at every contract you've ever signed, every NDA to every customer that we have where we were sharing data, and going through all of that history and trying to find every single thing, because our life we knew was going to come under a microscope, while you're building this sales pipeline. And on the sales side, building up sales reporting that the kind of stuff they're going to want to look at, that you've got all that infrastructure behind it so you can deliver to them the kind of intelligence that you need to explain to them why your pipeline is as robust as it is, all while taking care of your customers. I mean, the one thing about our company, because we had remarkable people, is our retention of customers was unbelievable. I mean, nobody really ever left. I mean, a couple from sort of weird circumstances and so forth. But I look at the job one is just having a good company that people want to buy from. And then you get into all this other stuff of making sure everything's well documented, and, things you did 10 years ago, and making sure your finances are in place and your sales operation looks right, and all the HR stuff is in place, that, who do you have, who has employment agreements, and, because when you're in the middle of building a company, a lot of times the actual legal documentation is an afterthought because you're so busy just trying to run a company. And that all comes back to bite you in a circumstance like this. So we spent many months trying to build up our kind of documentation. It was all there someplace. We just had to pull it together in a place that a third party could look at. And that was a thing that Ted's team was really helpful, is just letting us know the kinds of things people were going to look at, giving us kind of a checklist, and letting us run at it. It's very hard.
Jeff, we actually have a question from the audience here. We are a medical, this is from Stephen Rosenweig. We are a medical services company with a strong technology platform. We have been in business profitably for the past 37 years.
Wow.
We currently have 11 in-house developers and over $1 million to spend on benefits doing this in-house. How much control and quality would we lose by offshoring like you did?
By offshoring a lot like we did, none. Because we were in the unique circumstance of our offshore operation is a wholly owned subsidiary of our company. And so all those, it didn't really matter whether they were in Kathmandu or San Francisco. They were employees like we all were. They had stock options like we all did. They followed the same HIPAA policies that we followed. they followed all the same software development processes that we follow. It's one, you just think about it as one continuous operation all under one management. If you offshore it to a third party, then I think you lose a lot of control. But I would also say that even doing it the way we did, it only works when you invest the time and effort to get everybody to understand each other and have the same, kind of relationship and feelings about each other. Like I went to Nepal 18 times. Our people would constantly go to Nepal. Those people would constantly come here. I know those people over there the same way I know my employees over here. There's no difference. So
someone mentioned, I just saw it pop up on time differences and things like that. I will tell you that there was a lot of data management associated with this company, and so it actually was a benefit in terms of being able to process information and data on off hours, but a challenge, I would say, Jeff, on the flip side of that. And I think they did a wonderful job of, having different shifts, different folks available, different time zones available. When you control that, I think you've got a lot of flexibility to make that time difference an advantage, not a disadvantage.
Yeah, we did. We ran 3 shifts, and even near the end, it got more sophisticated as time went on. But today, right now, there's somebody in Nepal monitoring all of our software that's out there in the US. And if there's any blip in one of the servers or anything else, there's somebody in Nepal jumping on it overnight in their nighttime, our daytime. So it doesn't come easy. It takes a significant effort, but it really became a real benefit to our company. It just did. And that's why it was so important for a buyer to see the value of that. Otherwise, they weren't going to give us the valuation of somebody that did.
Whoa.
All right, folks, let me do a little final announcement. We did the Q&A session. As I said earlier, there are structured slides that address just about everything that Jeff and Ted were going through today. So we will email those, but to the extent that you want them immediately, please contact either Mark or myself, and we'll send you out a set of the slides today. So I want to thank our lead speaker here today, Jeff. It was really nice to spend time with you and learn from this experience, and Ted, for a great moderator of today's event. I thank you very, very much. This was wonderful. To all those that were kind enough to join us today, again, be on the lookout for an email from us. We'll send out these slides, and also we'll send you the link on YouTube where you can watch us again and pick apart what Jeff and Ted were saying, and then write some more questions to us in the future. Gentlemen, thank you all for your contributions today. And
thank you everyone else for joining as well.
Thank you.